Hi, I'm Janny
And hi, I'm Nicky, and we'd like to welcome you.
to Pocket Talk.
Hi and welcome. And today we're going to be thinking a little bit more about the connection between psychotherapy and spirituality.
And how spirituality has deepened our whole understanding as psychotherapists of what this human journey is all about. So let's start at the beginning. Why do we go and see a therapist in the first place? Why do we end up in a therapist's consulting room?
Well, I guess usually it's because we've become stuck. And often the story, I think probably both of us here is that we're stuck in a pattern. We're going around in circles. We're doing the same things, seemingly getting the same experiences over and over again. And it may be that it's come to a head, or there's been the final straw that's broken the camel's back that brings people into therapy.
Yeah, I think that's right. The stuckness and, the wanting to understand just what's going on. And we observe those habits and those loops we get into, and we think, why am I here again? Why am I doing this again? Or why is this showing up in my life again?
And I think, I think it's also helpful to say that, of course, in order to become therapists, we also have been in that place. We've also been on that journey and sat in the therapist chair, facing our issues, facing the areas that maybe have been really difficult for us in our lives.
Yeah, so we've all been on that journey ourselves and had to do lots of facing up to things and, parts of ourselves that were a bit uncomfortable or painful, things that we just didn't understand. And I think, having done that work helps you maybe see a little bit more clearly what's going on for other people at times.
And I think you can't do this job without, we can't do this job without having done that work.
No.
It's because we've done that work, because we faced our own issues that we can be of help to somebody else.
And I think, what that work involves, which is why what we're really, that's the question we're asking, isn't it? Is what that work involves is basically looking at how the you that you are today has been influenced really profoundly by the you that you've been from the moment you came into this world. So all your experiences, big and small. It's always amazing to me how, I think not to me because I expect it, but to clients, how seemingly really tiny incidents that they wouldn't really think were that significant at all actually have had a profound effect on them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and often, I find myself having to explain to people that it's who are maybe feeling a bit guilty that they've come and that they're wasting my time and that nothing very serious has happened to them, but that actually it's the minority of people who've had something really extreme, and actually that many people who end up in the therapist chair there because there are things that have happened that might be deemed as apparently normal to people around them or society, but actually as therapists we know that those things can cause problems, can be traumatic.
And I think the other thing that people worry about is that to start to talk about their past or their childhood or their background is somehow to get involved in blaming people. And actually it's really not that at all. For every single one of us, we do the best we can at the time we're trying to do it, and we couldn't ever have done anything different at those times. So it's never ever about pointing the finger of blame at somebody. It's just trying to understand cause and effect. How has that affected you? How do you still carry it? How do you still act it out? Why is it still something that you struggle with or keeps popping up in your life?
Yes, that's a big one, isn't it? The sense of guilt, the sense that somehow people come and they may want to talk about things that have happened to them, but they've also got maybe other voices in their heads saying that it's wrong to to say anything that's seemingly critical of a parent or of other family members. There can be a lot of taboo about that. And that's a difficult one, and I think sometimes it's really important and often has to be spoken that it isn't about blame. It's sometimes about responsibility.
Yeah.
But not really about blame, because each of us comes into the world with our own set of issues, and we can only see what we can see at any given moment.
And to the product of our own upbringing, and it goes back and back and back, doesn't it? There can't be blame anywhere in this. But I think that it has to start, the journey of I'm stuck, this keeps happening, I keep feeling this way. Fundamentally, I'm not happy, and I want to feel different, and I want my life to be different. We can't do that without understanding how we've got to where we are.
Yes, and that it's really important to look back sometimes in order to see what shaped and formed us.
Because I think those are the challenges that we come into this life with. And I think, both you and I, having steeped ourselves in psychotherapy thinking, and then having been bowled over by more recent spiritual thinking, have taken on board not just that our past influences are present, but that actually we come in because it's meant to, because that is our journey. That's the journey of this lifetime. We choose the setup, we choose the characters, we choose the roles, we choose the flaws, we choose the beginnings, and they set the scene for the story that's going to be our lifetime.
And the characters.
And the characters of our lifetime.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
I wonder if it might be helpful to say a bit initially about how it is that looking at our stuckness in psychotherapy helps us become unstuck. Because one of the things that is fundamental in psychotherapy training is understanding that everything that happens between therapist and client in the room is also going to be happening out there in the world, and is also a very, very clear indication of what used to happen or has happened back then. So, the example I would use is a client rings my doorbell, comes in, wipes their feet loads and loads of times, and then says, I think I should take my shoes off because they're dirty. And, that seems like just an ordinary thing, but most people come in, wipe their feet 2-3 times, walk in with their shoes on. So here immediately you've got somebody who's worried about messing up your home,
Yes.
Bringing their mess, their dirt in.
And upsetting you.
Are you going to be cross? Are you going to think badly of them? They're really worried about the impression they're making on you.
Yes.
And immediately you've got a little child of 3 or 4 walking into your consulting room who was taught to be really worried about what other people thought and to not make a mess of things.
Yes, and that's being repeated. That's being repeated now as an adult, but that adult is going to be really unconscious of what the source of that issue is. They just believe that they have a belief that we should be polite. We shouldn't make a mess. We should look after other people, and that will all seem really normal to them.
Yes, and it's only when a therapist points that out that's what they've just done. That we all do, don't we? We look at our therapist in utter amazement, but that's what I always do. And then it begins to dawn in a aha kind of way.
Yes.
Oh, maybe other people don't do that.
Yes.
Maybe that's saying something about what I've learned. Perhaps that's part of my stuckness, that I I have to be careful around people, and I worry what people say. I have to keep taking my shoes off so that they don't see the mess I might bring in.
Yes, yes.
So how about we talk a bit about the unconscious, and we go back to that client stroke little boy 4-5 who's just walked into my consulting room and sat down having taken his shoes off, and we talk about the unconscious in relation to that, because this little boy of 4 or 5 is feeling in his body sensations that tell him, if we help him to notice, that his unconscious is around. So he's sitting in my chair in the consulting room, and he's feeling anxious, he's feeling a bit ashamed, he's scrutinising me and wondering what I'm thinking about him. And if I asked him what he was feeling in his body in that moment, he would be feeling all the sensations, all the panic, all the anxiety that that little boy of 4 or 5 used to feel. And that's where our unconscious is held. It's held in our body. It's held as bodily sensations. It's there in our cellular memory. And the way that we learn to know that our unconscious is around and that we're acting something out that comes from our past is that we feel those bodily sensations. They are our emotional GPS, if you like. They're our signal that something's going on, that is happening now but has a huge overtone to it that's coming at us from the past.
Yes, and it's learning to recognise, well, first of all, I think one of the most complicated things can be even to just tune into those feelings, to start to become aware of them, and for some people even to have help to make sense of what those physical sensations, how they equate to, a particular feeling, a particular emotion.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the whole issue of feelings is we don't necessarily know what feelings are. We very often say to each other, what are you feeling? And the answer will come back, well, I'm thinking that it's quite late and I ought to be leaving.
Yes,
and
yes.
And so we answer the question, what are you feeling, with what am I, this is what I'm thinking.
Yes.
And that's just an indication of how far away from what we're actually feeling we've gone.
Yes.
We're living in our head. And that's part of why we get stuck, of course. We live in our head. We try to decide what we should do, what the right thing to do is, what is expected of us. And we're no longer thinking, what do I feel? What do I need? What do I want?
Well, I think feelings are a whole lot more scary than thoughts. I think emotions and feelings are greatly underestimated in terms of their power, but actually I think they're enormously powerful and I think for many of us enormously frightening.
I think another fear that people have when they start on this journey of looking into themselves is that they feel they're going to come across feelings that are going to be so overwhelming they'll drown in them. They won't be able to manage them.
And that a lot of therapy is helping somebody to face up and manage and cope with emotion, and to be able to make sense of it and to know that it won't overwhelm them, it won't cause them to collapse,
and that it's information.
But often there's a barrier being created to emotion, and I think that's often a sign of somebody who's maybe really struggling, who's got something that's a real difficulty for them, that they can't go near emotion and they've had to put up a barrier towards it.
And I think again, that's often something that's happened through nobody's fault in childhood. So, if our parents were emotionally shut down themselves, they didn't know how to help us manage our emotions, or maybe we had really over-anxious parents, overprotective parents who were so upset and worried by our feelings that they transmitted to us that feelings were dangerous.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
didn't know how to help us contain them.
Yes.
Because it was hard for them to contain their own feelings.
Yes, and in fact, one of our roles as parents, and both Janny and I are both parents of. We both have 3 children each, but one of our roles is actually to help a child manage their emotions, and to be able to access them and learn and relate to them, and that as Janny said, for whatever reason, sometimes parents aren't able to do that, and then that causes us enormous problems when we're older, because feelings can feel very, very frightening, really overwhelming.
Or totally inaccessible, like we just don't know what a feeling feels like. We've cut our head off from our body, if you like, and whatever is going on in our body, we don't recognise as telling us that a feeling is happening. So we don't know when we're hungry, we don't know when we're tired and need to stop. Even at its most fundamental, we don't know what our body is telling us.
Because we've stopped being able to, or we've never learned to be able to tune into those parts of ourselves.
And I think these things are often real revelations for us when we get into therapy. Because usually we end up in therapy because we've got a bit of a problem thinking about what it is we're feeling, needing, wanting. We're stuck because we don't know how to begin to work that out.
And I think, one of the other things that often people present with is anxiety. And anxiety is often the first, is often a lid or a mask to bubbling emotion that's under the surface. And once we start to be able to access what the emotion is, what the issues are, the anxiety dies away.
I think anxiety and depression both are serious indicators, really helpful, useful indicators for us, so that, when we've had defences in place against remembering or feeling something for a long time, when it starts to come to the surface, we experience enormous anxiety, and we think that panic is something, bad, something that we should be worried about, but actually it's the breaking through of something.
Yes.
And I think in a similar way with depression is suppressed feeling. It's feelings and experiences we've suppressed, and again, its presence is a good sign. It says we're ready to go somewhere.
Yes. I think that's a really common perception, isn't it? We don't like to experience anxiety, we don't like to experience depression. They're not comfortable emotions, and yet actually if as a psychotherapist we know that those are actually really positive signals, and I think we'll talk a bit later about spiritually why they're really important as well. They're an opportunity, and they're often the things that signal us that we need to go and get some help.
And that we're stuck, and that there's a journey to go on of working out what is going on inside us that isn't okay.
So I think it might be helpful for us to give some examples maybe of, the sort of issues that people might present with, the sort of stories that they come with and the way that presents and how we work through it in therapy. And have you got anything that you might be able to share?
How about we talk about somebody who could be any one of us? Lots of us will know this place. So how about we call this person, let's call her Karen. And let's say that Karen is a really sociable, outgoing, friendly woman. She's in her early 40s, and to look at Karen from the outside, you would think she had lots and lots of friends. But if you watched with more detail, you would notice that several things keep happening in Karen's life. So firstly, you'd notice that if any friend started to need her too much or lean on her too much, she would gradually withdraw from that friendship. And if one of her friends moved to another part of the country, Karen would say she would stay in touch, but actually every time she went to pick up the phone or to write a text, she would feel something in her body and she wouldn't do it. And And if we were to meet Karen in therapy, we might discover that when Karen was a little girl, she suffered a period of separation from her mum or her dad, somebody really important to her.
Yes.
And that throughout her adult life, whenever somebody begins to be important or significant to her, she has to break off the contact. She has to break off the relationship. And it's as if she is anticipating how bad it's going to feel when she loses somebody else.
Yes.
And so she makes it happen.
So she avoids it.
Yeah.
And she actually ends relationships rather than allow any form of ending.
Yeah.
And to allow herself to experience the feelings and the loss of that.
And she's likely also probably to break off therapy early too. You know, that thing about in here, everything that happens in here is an indication of what happens out there, which tells you what happened back then.
Yes.
The whole thing is going to get replayed.
Yes, and that it's all a repeat, and that it's a repeat of the first story, and the story for Karen would have been the immensity of the loss at a time when she was too young and too little to be able to cope with it.
Yeah.
And often I think that those kinds of losses are often quite early.
Yes.
Sometimes in the first 5 years of a child's life. And I think the really important bit is to remember is that the younger we are, the less able we are to cope, the less we understand, the more things become overwhelming.
Yeah, we don't have language. You know, we manage feelings more easily as grown-ups because we can put them into words. Even if we're not saying them out loud, we can think in our head in words. But for a child where there's something happened pre-verbal,
Yes.
there is only bodily sensation, there's only bodily memory, and an acting out of something, like a knowing that you must cut off contact, but not knowing why. In terms of psychotherapy, the work with Karen would begin the day Karen decides that she wants to leave therapy. Right in the middle of the work going well, right in the middle of a relationship being built together that feels really strong.
Because that would be the really scary bit for
That
Karen.
would be the scary bit, because the therapist is becoming important to Karen, and therapy isn't going to last for a lifetime.
Yes.
And so all those fears of losing somebody and the grief that you're going to feel would now be right there available at the surface to work with.
Yes, and at its most acute and most painful, and that's the very time when that unconscious young part of Karen would be most active, most frightened, most likely to want to get up and run.
And I think that's where the therapy relationship comes into its own, because just like all the research says, you know, what makes the difference is the relationship. You know, it doesn't really matter about the model, it doesn't really matter about the mode, it doesn't really matter particularly about the gender necessarily of the therapist. What matters is the strength of the relationship.
Yes.
And I guess that's where the turning point happens, that's where the change starts to happen, that someone realises here is somebody that you can trust, who you can have a different kind of experience with.
And who can hold all of that for you? You know, who can bear the degree of grief, and in that grief will be all sorts of feelings of sadness, of anger, of frustration, of it's not fair, of you know, and that all of that will have to be worked out between the two of you, and in surviving that and being able to cope with that is how, as a therapist, you are of benefit to
I think that's
another.
so important. I think what you've just said about surviving that is really important. The discovery that you can be angry with the therapist, and the therapist isn't going to make you go and show you the door. You can be disappointed with the therapist, and you can share your grief that they're not going to be in your life forever. and that the therapist can hold that, but hold the hope for you that it will have been enough.
Yes.
It will have been enough, and that healing will have happened.
Because it's rare that we experience that kind of emotional journey with somebody else out there. You know, for most people, you know, they avoid those kinds of feelings, or they're upset by those kinds of feelings. And so often it is only in therapy that we can dare to go to those places, and that's only with the help of our therapist, because we have to be enabled to do that. And it's really about enabling somebody to be able to go there and know that they can survive it, that both of you can survive it, and that you can work through to a very different place.
And I think, you know, I think there's been lots of research, hasn't there, that has shown that people going into therapy have a very different view of life and relationship from people who are coming out the end of therapy. And I remember a friend of mine doing a piece of research years ago about people's views of, you know, God or the universe or fate or whatever, and that after coming out of therapy, people had a very, you know, much more kinder, more benign view of life, the universe, God, all that is, whatever you might call it. But actually, that I think that psychotherapy is often a first step towards further spiritual growth.
Absolutely. And that there's an opening up to other possibilities. I think that when we're in our much more raw, you know, state, that we're very closed, we can be very insular. We have to hold ourselves in that place, because the world's maybe been really frightening, really tough, really scary for us, and on our survival mode has actually protected us. You know, we've had to go into that insular place, we've had to protect ourselves and acquire the sort of defences we needed in our younger years. But actually, psychotherapy is a process where we can start to be able to slowly let go of some of those experiences, and as we start to become less insular, less protective of ourselves, then the world and other spiritual possibilities open up, and we open up to them.
Yeah, because I think our heart opens up. You know, I think our heart is the part of us, as you know, you're referring to our protecting ourselves. I think it's our heart that we protect, and it's our heart that we close down. And I think when we've come through the experience of a relationship that's so strong that nothing will break it, and where another human being has been able to hold the hope for us that we can survive and that life can be okay, then our heart does open up, and we come out the other side of therapy ready for everything that life's got to offer us and throw at us.
It's like we're looking through a very different set of lenses at the world. You know, when we're in our raw state, we're looking through the lenses at the world as young, frightened children often, and that once we've been able to steady and grieve maybe the things that have happened to us when we're young, we no longer have to look at the world through the eyes of the little person we were at 4, at 5, at 6, whatever, and that we start to see the world quite differently. It's not the frightening place that we knew when maybe we were young.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, what you were saying about the lens that we see the world through, I think it's really important to know that that child part of us isn't left behind there. You know, we have lots and lots of parts of us. We have the part that knew this, we have the part that lived that, we have the part that remembers that. You know, a smell, a voice, a place can take us back to being 3, being 8, being 14 all over again. And our entire body feels that age, the sensations in our body are part of that complete memory of what happened then. And we suddenly find ourselves speaking and acting and feeling exactly like we did back then.
Yes.
And I know you and I call those things memory feelings,
Yes,
don't we?
yes, absolutely. And they're incredibly powerful. And I guess for most people pre-therapy, those things happen and we don't realise that happening. It's an unconscious filter that we look through and we don't realise is there. And, part of therapy is about embracing those younger parts of ourselves. It's that they certainly don't get left behind, but being those parts of ourselves get to have a voice, and gradually we start to embrace and incorporate those parts of ourselves, and so we recognise and we know when we're starting to look through the lens of the us that we were when we were 10 or 4 or whatever age something difficult happened to us.
And I think pre-therapy we tend to feel a bit ashamed, a bit awkward about those places, those parts of us that we often call the shadow side.
Yeah.
And I think, like you've said, when we start to integrate them, we feel more compassion for them. And I think in feeling more compassion for ourselves and for those parts of us, we actually grow in compassion for the rest of our fellow human beings as well.
Yes.
So now maybe it's worth saying something about how psychotherapy meets spirituality in the way that you and I now think about the work that we do and, the world and the universe in general. Because you and I are both women who have trained as psychotherapists and been doing that work for a long time, but also have both been through a spiritual awakening process.
Yes, big shock.
Big time, bolt between the eyes.
Yeah.
And that that what we want to do in these programs is to share our excitement really about the way the two inform each other. And
yes, because I suppose I've been a trainer as well as a psychotherapist in many years, and so I've come across lots of people who families who were managing people who were very distressed, and one of the bits of information I gleaned from those experiences was how desperate people were for this information.
Yeah, no, you're right, because they would, you've told me, haven't you, that people would say to you, why isn't this out there? Why isn't this on the TV? Why isn't this on the radio?
Yeah.
Why is nobody telling us this stuff? Because we know that there's libraries full of it.
Yes.
And it's like we're this secret society.
Yes, I mean, I think there's libraries full of psychotherapy information. There's libraries full of spiritual, books. But there are people out there talking about the bridge, but I think there's not many.
Yeah.
And I think what we're hoping to do in these talks is to be able to create some sort of bridge between the two, make it meaningful. Because it is meaningful. There is a reason that these two things are joined.
Oh, it's mind-blowing the way the two inform each other. So, you go back to Karen and you go one step further beyond looking at the experiences that have made Karen the character that she is now. Let's say that, because of course really Karen is a very powerful being of light and love.
Yes.
Karen is source energy who has incarnated for the experience of a human lifetime.
Yes.
And so Karen has set all that in motion.
Yes.
Karen's decided, together with her mum and her dad and everybody else that she's going to meet, how this adventure is going to go.
Yes, that it's all been predetermined.
Yeah, predetermined.
Pre-agreed.
Set up, and then roll cameras, let it
play out.
Play out, really.
Yes. And that the part that psychotherapy plays is that the difficulties play out, and the way that we return to the source energy that we really are, the way that we are able to access that place again, is by working through the difficulties that we've incarnated on this earth to experience.
And the fear that they produce in us. So to go from being fear-based
to love
and to remember the loving being that we are.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so I guess, we've said that in a bit of a bumbling way, but that's what we're intending to do.
Yes.
And this has been a taster. This has been a first go.
Yes.
And we really hope you've enjoyed it.
Yes, and that we hope that we'll be able to do more sessions where we talk about maybe the different sorts of issues that people might be struggling with, and how that all connects up spiritually with the people that the essences that we really are, and how we negotiate those kinds of troubles, those difficulties, to find a different place
and to find our way back to remembering who we really are, and the extent of our power, the extent of our ability to manifest the life we want once we find our way back to love.
Yes. Well, it's been a pleasure. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Will do. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Pocket Talk with Nicky and Janny. If you have things you'd particularly like us to talk about, general questions or thoughts you'd like to ask or share, you can private message Janny and I via the Facebook page, The Therapist in My Pocket, www.facebook.com/TT in my pocket, or you can email us directly at theterapistinmypocket@gmail.com.
You can listen to me, Janny Judley, on YouTube and SoundCloud as Janny Judley, The Therapist in My Pocket. And you can follow me at Janny Judley on Twitter and on Instagram. My latest book, Dancers Amongst the Stars, is available on Amazon, and you can read more at www.theterapistinmypocket.com.
Janny's also a regular columnist with Elephant Journal and is writing for Kindred Spirit UK. If you'd like to read her pieces, you can find her as Janny Judley on www.elephantspirituality.com.
For now, thanks so much for your company and for showing up here to share this space with us. We look forward very much to receiving your thoughts and questions and suggestions, and to sharing many interesting and helpful discussions, tips and explanations to help us all on our spiritual journeys.
Thank you for listening
to Pocket Talk.